Be honest with me here. Do you talk to yourself when you're completely alone? Maybe you mutter under your breath while you're hunting for your keys, or maybe you have full-blown, out-loud conversations while you're driving. If you do, there's a really good chance you've caught yourself mid-sentence, quickly glanced around to make sure literally no one was watching, and felt a little flush of embarrassment. Hey, we have all been there.
But here's the thing. There is a massive gap between how society sees this habit and what science actually tells us. For the longest time, society has slapped labels on talking to yourself, right? Saying it's odd, it's a bit strange, or maybe it just means you're lonely. But psychology takes the exact opposite view. Decades of research show us that this one quiet habit is actually a cognitive superpower. It doesn't mean you're just quirky. It actually reveals 7 incredibly rare psychological traits that most people honestly never manage to develop.
Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer. We are going to completely dismantle the myth that talking to yourself is somehow a bad thing. We're going to explore the absolutely fascinating science behind the inner voice. And I promise you, by the time we wrap up, you are never going to look at your own private, out-loud conversations the same way again. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to group these 7 rare traits into 5 interconnected themes: the stigma versus science, problem-solving and creativity, mastering your emotions, focus in independent thinking, and finally, the ultimate feedback loop. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The stigma versus science. Breaking down the inner voice. Nearly a century ago, the brilliant Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky made an amazing discovery. He realized that kids naturally talk out loud to guide their own behavior. And as we grow up, that private speech doesn't actually disappear. It just goes, well, underground. It turns into the silent inner voice narrating our lives. But for some of us, that voice still likes to stretch its legs out in the open air from time to time.
Which brings us to our very first rare trait, reflective awareness. This is literally the psychological ability to split your mind. Basically, one part of you is taking an action, while the other part takes a step back to watch and examine it. Think about catching yourself saying out loud, "Wait, why did I actually do that?" You're not just making a choice, you're interrogating it. And that sits at the very heart of deep self-knowledge.
So that gives us trait 1, higher self-awareness. Look, most people move through their entire day on complete autopilot. They just react. But the self-talker, they use their spoken words like a mental mirror. Every quiet conversation you have with yourself is a deliberate act of paying attention to the one person we usually understand the least, ourselves. You are actively questioning your choices, instead of just blindly following them.
Moving right along to Section 2, problem-solving and creativity, thinking out loud in stereo. Let's shift our focus to the workbench for a second. Have you ever noticed why software engineers constantly mutter at their whiteboards, or why grandmaster chess players whisper through their potential moves? I promise you, they aren't losing their minds. They're actually using them at peak efficiency.
And that is trait 2, strong problem-solving ability. It's driven by a cognitive tool psychologists call the self-explanation effect. When you just think silently, ideas can be kind of a fuzzy, tangled mess, right? But speaking forces your brain to slow down. You literally have to translate those half-formed thoughts into precise, actionable steps. And here is the magic part. The second a flawed plan hits the air, your ears hear it and it sounds wrong in a way it never did when it was just bouncing around inside your head. It is real-time quality control.
Which naturally leads us to trait 4, higher creativity. I absolutely love this quote. A conversation with no one becomes a brainstorm with a room full of versions of you. Think about that. Great inventors, writers, and artists do this constantly. Speaking out loud gives you permission to argue with yourself, play different characters, and just ask, "What if?" out loud. Silent thinking tends to circle the exact same familiar grooves. But when you speak, ideas collide and these strange, wonderful connections form in stereo.
All right, let's do a super quick check-in on the traits we've unlocked so far. We've got trait 1, higher self-awareness, trait 2, strong problem-solving, and trait 4, higher creativity. Now, if you're keeping track and thinking, wait, you skipped trait 3? Don't worry, we are diving into that right now.
Welcome to Section 3, Mastering Your Emotions, Your Own Personal Coach. I want you to imagine your internal monologue for just a second. Think about a time when you were highly anxious, really stressed out, or under a ton of pressure. What does the voice inside your head sound like in that exact moment? For a lot of people, it's just a downward spiral of panic. But for the out-loud self-talker, it actually transforms into a personal coach.
Okay, you've got this. You've handled worse. It's such a simple phrase, isn't it?
But Ethan Kross, a brilliant psychologist over at the University of Michigan, has built a huge chunk of his career studying this exact phenomenon. And he found something really remarkable about the specific words we use when we talk to ourselves under stress.
And this builds trait 3, exceptional emotional regulation. When people talk to themselves using their own name or the word you instead of I, they create what's known as psychological distance. You literally stop drowning in your own panic, and you start coaching yourself from the outside. People who naturally do this have a super rare emotional skill. Right in the middle of stress, they name the fear out loud and reassure themselves, just like a really good friend would. They're regulating their mind in real time.
Next up is Section 4, Focus and Independent Thinking, Steering Attention and Trusting Yourself. So, there is a really common assumption out there that achieving true, deep focus requires absolute pin-drop silence. Head down, mouth shut. But as we're learning today, psychology proves the exact opposite can be true.
And this leads right into trait 5, greater focus and mental performance. Get this. In a famous study, researchers asked people to find a specific object in a highly cluttered scene. The people who said the name of the object out loud actually found it significantly faster. The spoken word pulled the target right out of all that visual noise. The exact same thing goes for athletes who use short instructional cues to snap a drifting mind back to reality. Or even you repeating keys, wallet, phone as you walk out the front door. Your voice is a literal tool that locks your attention onto a task and shuts out the distractions.
And having that intense focus leads directly to trait 6, strong independence of thought. Think about it. When most people are unsure, they reach outward. They ask a crowd, they start scrolling their phones, they look for someone else to give them permission on what to think. But people who regularly think out loud, they turn inward. They get used to the sound of their own reasoning. They test it out, they push it, and ultimately they learn to trust it. They are comfortable sitting completely alone with a hard problem, which builds this incredibly uncommon ability to stand firmly on their own conclusions.
Let's recap this powerhouse trio of traits we just uncovered. Trait 3, exceptional emotional regulation. Trait 5, greater focus and mental performance. And trait 6, strong independence of thought. When you combine the ability to calm yourself down, laser focus your attention, and completely trust your own reasoning, you are looking at a fundamentally resilient and self-reliant human being.
Which brings us to our final section, the ultimate feedback loop, a relentless drive to grow. This is where we introduce the final and honestly perhaps the absolute rarest trait of them all. This is the one that weaves all the previous threads, the self-awareness, the problem-solving, the emotional coaching, into one massive, overarching life philosophy. This is trait 7, continuous personal growth. People who talk to themselves tend to treat their lives like an ongoing project. They replay a hard day and ask out loud, okay, what could I have done differently? They rehearse for big upcoming moments out loud. When they fail, they don't just wallow in it. They actively interrogate the failure for lessons. Because real growth, it doesn't happen in these giant dramatic leaps. It happens in thousands of small, private conversations where you hold yourself accountable, you forgive yourself, and you resolve to just try again tomorrow.
I want to let this thought sink in for a second. The visible sign of a mind that is constantly learning, adapting, and growing. So that voice in the empty room, it is not a sign that something is wrong with you. Far from it. It is literally the sound of a mind that refuses to stop improving.
So let's bring the whole shebang together. Higher self-awareness, sharper problem-solving, steadier emotions, deeper creativity, stronger focus, independent thinking, and an endless drive for continuous growth. 7 incredibly rare traits, all carried by one quiet voice in an empty room. What the world loves to dismiss as an odd little quirk might just turn out to be one of the absolute most useful tools the human mind has ever developed.
And honestly, the best part, if you already talk to yourself, well, you've had this superpower all along. So I want to leave you with a question to really think about today. Which of these 7 traits sounds the most like you? Take a moment to reflect on your own inner and outer voice. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep adapting, and please, keep talking to yourself.